Hey guys, my name is Max and welcome to Simple Biology. In this video we're going to be talking about viruses. Now, I'm sure you've heard of viruses. They're present basically everywhere you go. There are viruses that cause the flu, AIDS, Ebola. But the most interesting thing, in my opinion, is that viruses are not actually alive. There's some argument on both sides, but for the most part, biologists view viruses as non-living particles, basically of proteins and nucleic acids. Viruses, the main reason they're not considered alive is because they need a host cell in order to reproduce. And they have many different functions and different processes that use them. And because of all that, we're going to study them, and that's why we're going to show you how viruses work in this video. First off, we're going to talk about the structure of a virus. Now, like I mentioned, viruses are made up of proteins and nucleic acids. Note here that we say nucleic acids rather than DNA, because there are viruses that use double-stranded and single-stranded DNA, as well as double and single-stranded RNA. Obviously, viruses don't like to play by the same rules as most organisms, one of the many reasons that we view viruses as not alive. There are actually some viruses that have a membrane coat, but this membrane coat it actually came from eukaryotic organisms. These are just viruses that formed inside of a cell, and as they came out, they brought the membrane with them. They have molecules that are used to hijack cell machinery, so some of those are like these projecting surface molecules, and these surface molecules will enable them to enter the cell in order to use those machinery. There are also various other things that will basically throw a monkey wrench in the system for whatever the host cell is. There are even some that have a specific enzyme known as reverse transcriptase. The most common example is the HIV virus, which causes AIDS. And this reverse transcriptase enzyme will actually do the opposite of what RNA polymerase does. It will take an RNA and create a double-stranded DNA molecule out of it. So there are certain viruses that have that enzyme. That's where that enzyme comes from. We'll be using that in one of our later videos. We'll be talking about that. Next, we're going to talk about the different life cycles that viruses go through. Although, I guess a life cycle is a general term, since it's not actually alive. But viral cycles, I guess. So there are two main cycles that viruses can go through. There's the lytic cycle and the lysogenic cycle. The way I usually remember this is that lysogenic, that word is longer than the word lytic, and the lysogenic cycle is longer than the lytic cycle. So first we're going to talk about the lytic cycle. First off, the lytic cycle works immediately. Essentially, in this example, it's a bacteria being infected by a phage, and so this phage will infect that bacteria. It'll insert its genome, its nucleic acids, which will then be used by the bacteria's machinery in order to create more of these phages, of these viruses. So in the lytic cycle, that will work immediately. It'll just right off the bat start copying that genome, start producing that genome's proteins, and the bacteria cell will actually start to break down and eventually lyse. The viruses that undergo only the lytic cycle are known as virulent. This is because they're much more virulent, they're much more violent than those that will undergo the lysogenic cycle, which we'll be talking about in just a minute. Also, these often kill the host cell. If the cell has become lysed, it's not going to be functioning any longer. It no longer has a membrane, it no longer has compartmentalized organelles, or it no longer is compartmentalized at all in the case of the bacteria. Next we have the lysogenic cycle. And essentially the main difference between the lysogenic cycle and the lytic cycle is that in the lysogenic cycle, the virus will actually lie dormant. And so what will happen is after this genome has been inserted, it will go along this alternate pathway rather than going down the lytic cycle. It'll come over. That genome will actually fuse with the bacteria's genome, or the genome of whatever the host cell is. And every time the host cell duplicates, every time the host cell splits, it will take that genome into both daughter cells. So this cycle can just continue on indefinitely until something actually will trigger it to go back into the lytic cycle. But by then, there might be thousands of these cells that have duplicated, and that virus is just kind of lying dormant in the genome. So it will duplicate along with the host genome and later enter that lytic cycle in order to infect more cells. These viruses are known as temperate because they don't immediately kill the host, even though eventually the result is the same. So lastly, we have two more things that we're going to talk about. These actually aren't viruses, but they work fairly similar. So these are known as viroids and prions. So essentially, viroids are these small circular RNA molecules that will infect plants. And the interesting thing about these is that they can duplicate themselves. So once you start having a few of these viroids, they'll start to help each other duplicate, and they'll just build up and infect those plants. Again, these are only a single molecule. They're just a circular RNA molecule, sometimes of less than 100 base pairs. But they're in just the way that they'll duplicate themselves, and they'll just cloud out the plant's machinery. And so the plant will eventually die. These RNA molecules will just continue growing. Next, we have prions. Now, prions are behind some diseases that commonly affect animals. One example is mad cow disease, which, if you ever heard of that, you don't want to be eating beef from mad cow disease. Essentially, these are just protein molecules, but they can also self-replicate, and they infect animals, like I mentioned. There's also certain prions in the human body that will actually infect the human's brains, and often there it will take some proteins that are naturally supposed to occur in there and alter them in a way that they'll replicate and become prions. So prions are nasty, so are viroids. They're even smaller than viruses and can self-replicate just like them. And so that's all we have for viruses, and these other ones, they're really just as simple as that.